The forest at dawn was heavy with mist, branches dripping with last night's dew. Silence layered over the valley like a fragile veil. Then a cry split the air, sharp and desperate. It was not the call of a bird, but the panicked wail of a young deer sinking in treacherous swamp mud. Its thin legs flailed helplessly, every movement pulling it deeper. The reeds bent, the water shuddered, and the swamp seemed determined to claim the creature. Sunlight pierced the fog in fractured beams, casting the scene in eerie light. The struggle echoed across mistwood, a sound raw enough to shake the heart of anyone who heard it. Alone, trembling, the deer's chest heaved as exhaustion set in. Its wide eyes glistened with fear, a silent plea to the silent woods around it. Through the underbrush stumbled a small figure, fur matted and ribs showing beneath a golden coat. A stray golden retriever puppy, no more than 3 months old, padded toward the sound. Nose twitching, ears perked, the little wanderer had been searching for scraps, guided only by instinct and hunger. Yet the desperate cries pulled it away from its own need. Emerging from the brambles, the puppy froze at the sight of the trapped deer, then edged forward cautiously. Its tiny paws sank slightly in the damp earth as it circled the pit, tail stiff with alarm. Despite its size, its presence carried urgency. Where silence had stretched thin across the swamp, the arrival of the puppy created movement, energy, and a glimmer of hope. Though weak and starving, the golden eyes burned with determination, locking on the struggling deer as if fate had brought it there.
The deer thrashed violently, panic overtaking instinct, each desperate kick sending thick mud splashing higher up its flanks. The sound of sucking earth and frantic hooves echoed, a rhythm of survival clashing with impending doom. Its slender legs sank deeper with every attempt, the swamp pulling like a merciless hand. The young creature's sides heaved, nostrils flaring, ears pinned flat against its head. Nearby, the puppy's sharp barks pierced the air, startling the forest birds from the trees. Flapping wings scattered through the mist, amplifying the chaos. The puppy darted back and forth along the rim, its paws scratching the soil, circling the pit like a sentry too small for the danger before it. In that stark moment, the contrast burned clear. One life trapped and fading, another too small to rescue, yet unwilling to turn away. Against the odds, an unspoken alliance was beginning. The golden retriever puppy edged closer, front paws pressing against the slick edge of the swamp. Mud splashed up its fur, streaking the bright gold with dark stains. Yet it didn't flinch. The air smelled of decay, stagnant water mixing with churned earth, but the puppy pressed on. It barked and whimpered, pawing at the mud where the deer's leg protruded. Each attempt failed. The pit only groaned and bubbled in reply. The deer's eyes rolled, fear and fatigue dimming its once alert gaze. Its head drooped, antler buds trembling weakly as it sank another inch. The swamp creaked with sucking sounds, eager to finish its work. And still the puppy clawed and barked, its small body splattered and trembling, as if sheer will alone could pull the deer free. A fragile, muddy figure, fighting a battle far beyond its strength, refused to surrender to the silence. The deer's breathing grew shallow, movements slowing to a desperate rhythm. Its head lowered toward the muddy surface, lashes clumped with swamp water. It was the look of an animal teetering between life and surrender, the forest around it holding its breath. At the pit's edge, the puppy whined sharply, the sound raw and insistent. It stretched forward, licking at the deer's muzzle, muddy tongue scraping against trembling fur. The contact jolted life into fading eyes, a reminder that it was not alone. Though the swamp dragged, though the forest seemed indifferent, the puppy's presence lit a fragile spark. Exhaustion pressed heavy on both, the deer sinking, the pup trembling with hunger, but the bond forming was undeniable. In that single moment, strength was not measured by size, but by the refusal to abandon another creature. Hope flickered faintly in the dying light of dawn. The puppy's barks became sharper, echoing through the trees like desperate signals. Its voice cracked from exhaustion, yet it refused to stop. Circling the pit, it moved restlessly, paws sliding across wet earth, mud streaking its belly. Each bark was a cry to the forest, a demand for someone, anyone, to hear. The deer's ears twitched faintly at the sound, but its legs trembled too violently to fight. The swamp clung to its body like cement, thick and unrelenting. Overhead, a hawk circled, drawn by weakness, its shadow gliding across the water's surface. Yet the puppy's noise was defiance, a shield of sound against the creeping silence. Golden fur spattered black, eyes wide with fear but shining with determination, the little wanderer transformed into a sentinel. Alone in the swamp's cold heart, it chose to fight for another's life instead of its own.
Forest birds stirred at the relentless barking, fluttering from treetops to follow the sound. The once still glade grew restless, echoes bouncing off trunks, scattering far beyond the swamp's edge. Rosa, as the puppy would one day be named, was relentless. Each bark rang with urgency, carrying further than her small body seemed capable. The deer stirred faintly, nostrils flaring at the sound, struggling to keep its head above the surface. Its flanks quivered with exhaustion, hooves trapped tight, the swamp tugging mercilessly. Still, the cries rang out, insistent and sharp, commanding attention from the wilderness. In that moment, nature itself seemed to pause, as though waiting for what might answer. The smallest of voices had pierced the forest's silence, declaring that surrender would not be allowed. Not yet. Even as night shadows lengthened, the swamp could not quiet the puppy's defiant alarm. Darkness deepened, stars prickling faintly through gaps in the forest canopy. The swamp grew still, insects humming low over stagnant water, a lullaby of despair. The deer's body sagged, sides heaving with shallow breaths, each one weaker than the last. Yet the puppy, mud-caked and shivering, pressed close to the rim. Curling against the trapped body, it nestled its tiny frame against the deer's trembling flank. Warmth passed between them, fragile but real. The forest around them seemed endless, predators prowling unseen, yet the puppy stood guard, golden fur dulled by dirt, but heart blazing. All through the night, every rustle, every snap of twig brought a low growl from the pup, a warning sent out into the dark. For the deer, too weak to fight, it was not enough to save, but enough to endure until dawn brought another chance.
With dawn came a pale wash of light over Mistwood, painting the swamp in muted gold. The deer stirred faintly, head tilting as though straining against gravity itself. Its body shook violently, the mud's grip refusing release. Yet it was still alive, still fighting faintly. The puppy rose on trembling legs, fur stiff with dried mud, voice hoarse from hours of crying. And still, it barked. The sound was weaker, cracked, but urgent. Each cry rose through the mist like a flare, bouncing through the valley. Dew glistened on reeds, and for the first time in hours, something stirred beyond the trees. The puppy's persistence had carried through the silence, summoning an answer. Somewhere, feet crunched on damp earth. the forest caretaker on his morning route, ears pricking to the unnatural sound of desperate alarm. Help was finally drawing near. Joe Miller, 61, carried the weight of years in the woods, his boots worn smooth by countless miles of patrol. He had walked this path hundreds of times, yet today, something broke the routine. A thin, frantic barking, jagged and urgent, tore through the mist. Joe paused, listening, heart tightening. Stray dogs were not unusual in Mistwood, but this sound was different, desperate, purposeful. Following the cries, he pushed through brambles and stepped into the swamp clearing. What he saw rooted him in place. A golden retriever puppy, mud-smeared and frantic, darting at the edge of a pit where a young deer lay trapped, half submerged. The deer's legs flailed weakly, eyes wide and fading. The pup spun in circles, yelping, glancing at Joe as though pleading for intervention. In that instant, Joe knew this was no ordinary stray. The little dog was guarding a life.
Joe dropped his pack and knelt, eyes scanning the scene. The swamp pit churned where the deer struggled, each movement pulling it deeper. Mud clung to spindly legs like chains, dragging it lower with every frantic kick. The puppy, barely more than skin and bones, darted in front of Joe, barking with a force that belied its size. It ran to the deer, then back to him, as if begging for action. Joe's weathered hands clenched on his rope. He had seen animals in trouble before, but never with a guardian like this. The pup's eyes shone with urgency, tail stiff, paws splashing in shallow muck. It would not stop, could not stop. Joe realized the small dog was the only reason the deer was still fighting. Alone, the forest would have gone silent hours ago, but the puppy had refused to yield. The radio on Joe's belt crackled, and he called in for help, voice steady despite the scene before him. Minutes later, footsteps pounded through the mist. Sam Carter, a young hiker with rope over his shoulder, burst into view. His breath caught at the sight. The deer sinking, the puppy covered in mud, barking with raw desperation. The two men exchanged no words. Sam dropped to his knees, looping rope around his arm. The puppy barked louder, splashing toward the deer, then back to them, as though giving orders. Joe nodded grimly, laying planks across the bog's edge to create footing. The swamp sucked at the wood, hungry and heavy. The deer bleated weakly, nostrils flaring as its body trembled. Sam's rope uncoiled, rough fiber in his hands, hope coiled into a lifeline. The rescue had begun, guided by the persistence of a puppy.
They pressed boards into the mud, bodies straining, shoulders bowed. The swamp resisted, swallowing wood like it swallowed the deer, but enough held to bear their weight. Sam stepped carefully onto the slick surface, rope coiled around his chest. The puppy leapt beside him, paws splattering, barking in his ear as though urging him on. Sam crouched low, hands reaching for the deer's head. Its ears flicked weakly, wide eyes glazed, legs too deep to lift. Mud bubbled around its body, dark and thick, swallowing air with a sickening hiss. Joe braced from the bank, knuckles white around the rope. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Every sound, the buzzing insects, the puppy's frantic cries, the deer's ragged breathing, merged into a single rhythm of survival. Against the weight of the swamp, they pulled together, strength and hope knotted by rope. The rope slipped once, sliding across the deer's slick body, and panic surged. Sam grunted, trying again, but the mud clutched harder, pulling like quicksand. The deer's chest heaved, sides shuddering, exhaustion draining what little fight remained. Joe shouted instructions, anchoring the rope around a tree trunk, body braced against the earth. The puppy barked furiously, tail straight as a rod, circling them as if refusing to let failure in. The swamp gurgled, sucking the deer deeper, waterline rising toward its shoulders.
Every second was precious, every movement urgent. Sam's boots slid, mud threatening to take him too. Yet the small dog splashed at his feet, defiance in every sound, refusing to let silence settle. That relentless energy kept them moving, pushing back despair. It was not a man's will, nor a rope's strength, but a puppy's insistence that demanded they fight harder.
The deer thrashed once more, a final burst of fear that sent a spray of mud across the rescuers. For a terrifying instant, its legs vanished completely, swallowed to the chest. Joe's heart clenched, certain they were too late. But then, the puppy yelped sharply, pawing at the deer's muzzle, keeping its head tilted just high enough. That single gesture sparked motion. Sam hauled the rope tighter, digging heels into the shifting planks, muscles straining with all their might. Mud clung, heavy as stone, pulling the animal back with brutal strength. Sweat poured, rope burned, and the swamp hissed like it meant to win. But the cry of the puppy, raw and unrelenting, pierced through the chaos. The deer's head lifted again, nostrils flaring, spirit flickering back. With that spark, they refused to stop. The fight was not over yet. Failure loomed heavy as the deer sagged, body limp with exhaustion, legs still chained in muck. Sam's breath came ragged, hands blistered from rope. Joe shouted, pulling from the bank, yet the swamp resisted every inch. Then came the twist. The puppy leapt straight into shallow mud beside the deer, paws sinking, chest coated instantly. It barked at the animal's ear, nudging its muzzle, licking fur caked in filth. Rosa, the golden retriever stray, stood in the very danger she had fought to warn against, choosing to sink with the deer if it meant not leaving it alone. The sight jolted the men into action. With new fire, Sam shoved deeper, wrapping the rope around the deer's chest, mud lashing higher. Joe tightened the knot, voice hoarse. It wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was defiance against the swamp's claim on life. The boards creaked under strain, water bubbling, swamp gurgling louder as if mocking their efforts. The deer's sides heaved weakly, the rope now snug against its chest. Sam braced, arms trembling, mud tugging at his boots. Joe leaned back hard, body a lever against the anchored rope. The puppy splashed between them, voice hoarse but unrelenting. Every sound was a drumbeat, barking, straining, sucking mud, each second a battle of inches. The deer lurched upward once, body shifting slightly from the pit's grip. Sam shouted encouragement, pulling harder, veins standing against his skin. Joe's boots dug into soil, teeth clenched, rope biting into his palms. The swamp groaned, unwilling to let go, but momentum shifted. For the first time, mud peeled from the deer's body, reluctantly yielding. The fight had turned, a fragile victory sparked by the courage of something impossibly small. With each heave, the deer inched closer to solid ground, its eyes dull but still alive. Its breath came ragged, nostrils flaring with desperate gulps of air. The rope strained, fibers creaking, soaked in muck. Sam's muscles shook with fatigue, boots sliding dangerously on the boards. Joe's shoulders screamed with effort, every tendon pulled tight. And yet the puppy never relented, barking beside them, paws splashing mud, circling the deer's head as if commanding it to fight. At last the animal shifted fully, its legs dragging upward from the pit. The sucking sound cracked like thunder, mud protesting the loss. Then the deer toppled sideways onto firmer ground, collapsing with a shuddering groan. Silence fell for a beat, broken only by the rasp of breath. Theirs, the deer's, and the puppy's. 3 rhythms of life still intact. Against the swamp, they had won.
The deer lay sprawled, mud dripping from every limb, chest heaving with shallow but steady breaths. Its eyes fluttered open weakly, finding the puppy pressed close against its neck. The little golden retriever licked at its ears, tail wagging furiously despite exhaustion.
Joe dropped to his knees, chest heaving, staring at the small dog with awe. Sam sat back hard, wiping mud from his brow, disbelief etched on his face. They had pulled the ropes, strained their bodies to breaking, but it had been the puppy that kept the will alive. Without its cries, without its refusal to leave, this life would have been lost. The swamp bubbled once, a final protest, then stilled. Sunlight broke through the trees, scattering gold across mud-streaked fur and trembling limbs. The forest exhaled, silence returning, not with despair, but with relief. Life had been spared. The men stood back as the deer struggled weakly, head lifting, ears twitching. Its body shook violently, but it remained alive, still defiant in its fragility. The puppy pressed closer, licking mud from its face, circling as if to shield it from further harm. Joe leaned on his knees, whispering thanks under his breath, while Sam stared at the little stray with something close to reverence. Around them, the forest returned to sound. Birds calling, leaves rustling, nature continuing. Yet in that clearing, the moment hung eternal. A deer saved from death, a puppy transformed into a guardian, and two men humbled by what they had witnessed. Mud clung to their boots, fatigue ached in their bones, but none of that mattered. They had not rescued the deer alone. A stray golden retriever puppy had led them, and in truth had saved them all.
The deer's sides heaved with each shaky breath, its body trembling as mud dripped in thick streams to the earth. Every muscle seemed drained, yet its eyes glistened faintly with life. The puppy pressed close, head nestled against the deer's neck, tail wagging in short bursts despite exhaustion. The fragile contact carried reassurance, one creature reminding another that it was not alone. Joe stepped back, giving space, watching in silence. Sam set the rope aside, his chest still heaving from effort. The swamp gurgled faintly, then quieted, as though resigned to its loss. Against the weight of nature, against the odds of exhaustion, a life had been spared. In the clearing, no words were needed. Breath, silence, and the puppy's heartbeat against the deer's flank told the story. The smallest animal in the forest had become the reason another still stood a chance. Gradually, the deer lifted its head, ears twitching as though testing whether it still belonged to the living. Its nostrils flared, drawing in the damp morning air, shaky but steady. The puppy whined softly, nudging its muzzle into the deer's cheek, coating itself in streaks of mud without hesitation. For a moment, the deer leaned gently toward the small body, brushing its nose against golden fur. It was not an embrace as humans knew it, but an acknowledgement, fragile and unmistakable. Joe felt his throat tighten, humbled by the simple exchange. Sam exhaled as though he had been holding his breath for hours. Nature, raw and unfiltered, had spoken in a language older than words. The deer was alive, the puppy relentless, and together they had defied the swamp's grip. In that moment, gratitude passed from one creature to another in silence.
Joe wiped his brow with a trembling hand, realizing just how close death had stood in the clearing. Sam sat on the bank, rope coiled loosely at his side, eyes locked on the animals. The deer, still weak, pressed its head once more against the puppy's side before attempting to shift its legs. It wobbled, collapsed back down, but the effort alone was enough to stir hope. The puppy circled, barking softly, tail wagging as if encouraging it to rise again. Every sound from the small dog seemed to inject life into the exhausted animal. Joe leaned on his knees, whispering a prayer he hadn't spoken in years. He knew his rope and strength had played their part,
But without the stray, without its tireless cries through the night, none of this would have been possible. The forest had its hero, and it was small and golden. The clearing grew quiet again, but it was no longer heavy with despair. The swamp, defeated, lay still, its murky surface rippling only with insects. A shaft of light broke through the canopy, laying a warm glow across the deer's trembling body. It tried once more to stand, legs buckling but holding for a brief second before sinking down again. The puppy barked sharply, nudging at its shoulder, unwilling to accept surrender. Joe shook his head in disbelief. In all his years as a caretaker, he had never seen such persistence from an animal so small. Sam raised his phone, recording the scene instinctively, knowing people wouldn't believe it otherwise. The lens captured the mud, the trembling deer, and the tiny retriever pressing its muzzle against the creature's ear. No staged story could match the rawness of that bond. Nature had written it herself.
By midday, Sam's video had already begun to spread. Within hours, Mistwood's residents spoke of nothing else: the stray puppy that refused to let a deer die. Headlines bloomed across screens: "Puppy saves deer from swamp." Children in school whispered the tale, eyes wide with wonder. In corner cafes, locals replayed the footage again and again, shaking their heads in awe. It was not just the rescue that stirred hearts, but the sight of one small life guarding another. Comment sections filled with words like courage, loyalty, and miracle. Strangers debated whether animals carried instincts humans had long forgotten. For Joe and Sam, it was not about headlines, but about what they had witnessed firsthand. They had seen life return where silence had been moments from claiming it. And they knew no camera could fully capture the power of a puppy's refusal to give up. The Golden Retriever stray became a name on every lip, though most still called her simply the Guardian of Mistwood. She remained lean, ribs faint beneath her golden coat, but her spirit carried weight far beyond her size. Residents came searching, hoping to glimpse the little dog that had defied the swamp. Children brought scraps of food, adults carried admiration in their eyes. Rosa, as Joe quietly began calling her, greeted everyone with wagging tail, yet never strayed far from the forest edge. Her heart, it seemed, remained with the deer she had fought for. The story bound the community in ways unexpected. Strangers spoke more kindly to each other. Neighbors lingered longer in conversation. For once, people looked not only at their own burdens, but also at the lives around them. One puppy had done what sermons and speeches often failed to achieve.
Days later, whispers spread through the town again. The deer had been spotted near the swamp, thin but alive, grazing at the edge of the clearing where it had nearly been lost. Locals gathered in quiet awe, some standing at a respectful distance, others simply watching from behind trees. The puppy was there too, bounding through grass, tail whipping in circles. When it saw the deer, it dashed forward, barking in joyous bursts. The deer lifted its head, ears twitching, and for a long moment the two stood still. Then, slowly, it lowered its head toward the Golden Retriever. Rosa jumped, circled, barked again, pressing close as if greeting an old friend. The deer didn't flinch, only swayed gently in acceptance. Against all odds, their bond had not ended with the rescue. It was only the beginning of something enduring. Maya Torres, a wildlife volunteer with gentle eyes and steady hands, stepped into Rosa's story soon after. She offered food, shelter, and safety to the small stray, coaxing it into her home with patience and warmth. Yet Rosa never lost her pull toward Mistwood. Each dawn, she would scratch at the door, tail wagging, waiting to return to the forest's edge. Maya allowed it, walking with her sometimes, other times letting the puppy run free. Rosa always found her way back, but her paws always carried her first to the swamp clearing. There, more often than not, the deer would appear, stronger with each passing day, grazing under shafts of light. Maya watched silently as her dog pressed nose to muzzle, two creatures bound by a moment of crisis. She understood then that her role was not ownership, but guardianship of both dog and bond.
Seasons shifted, and with them, Rosa grew. The once fragile, mud-caked stray blossomed into a strong retriever, her golden coat thick and shining. The deer, too, transformed, no longer trembling, its body lean and muscled, antlers sprouting in velvet. Yet their bond never weakened. At dawn, in the hush before town stirred, the two could be seen together at the swamp's edge. Rosa bounded joyfully, splashing shallow water, while the deer stood patient, steady eyes following her every move. They were no longer survivors of one desperate night, but companions in life. Villagers whispered of it as if it were legend, a friendship born of struggle carried into peace. For those who saw them, it was a reminder that nature's bonds were not fleeting. They endured, unshaken by time. A puppy's choice to stay had become a lifetime's connection etched into Mistwood's heart. The final image belonged to the forest itself. Morning mist curled over the swamp as Rosa, full-grown and radiant, stood shoulder to shoulder with the deer, now crowned with antlers. Their silhouettes cut against the light, two creatures once marked by weakness, now standing as symbols of survival. Birds called overhead, water rippled gently, and the swamp lay quiet, defeated by their presence. To the people of Mistwood, the sight became legend. A retriever that had barked through the night, a deer that had risen from the muck, and a bond no swamp could swallow. Some said the puppy had saved the deer. Others whispered the deer had saved the puppy. But those who truly watched understood both had saved each other. In the smallest of hearts, the forest had found its strongest guardians, and together they stood as proof that kindness always wins.